Let's move on to Georgia, where the Senate runoff is coming this Monday, Tuesday, December 6th.
Yeah.
Say
next day.
So we'll get to some early voting numbers in a moment, but to start with, the funniest news out of this race, which has been funny all the way through, has been Herschel Walker straight up admitting that he does not live in Georgia during the campaign. And so K-File, Andrew Kaczynski's team over at CNN, obtained audio of him addressing the Georgia Republicans. We can put C1 up here. What is C? Is C1 the SOT or is C1 the, yeah?
Yep, C1's the SOT.
Let's play this audio that CNN obtained of this is Walker addressing Georgia college Republicans during the campaign for Senate in Georgia, which is a key point to bear in mind as you listen to this.
Everyone asked me, why did I decide to run for a Senate seat? Because to be honest with you, this is never something I ever thought in my life I ever did. And that's the honest truth. But as I was sitting in my home in Texas, and I was seeing what was going on in this country. You know, I live in Texas. Yeah, I went down to the border off and on sometimes.
So K-File also reported, according to publicly available tax records that Andrew and K-File reviewed, Walker's listed to get a homestead tax exemption in Texas in 2022. This is C2, which saves him approximately $1,500. Not a big deal in the net worth of Herschel Walker, but still shows that he's claiming to get a tax exemption. That his primary residence is in Texas. And what I heard Walker say in that clip is lived in Texas. It sounds like he says, I lived in Texas, not I live in Texas. I listened to it a couple of times. Either way, the tax exemption totally, it doesn't matter if he said live or lived, if he's claiming the tax exemption for a primary residence.
I heard live because to me, the context fit where he was saying, like, I live in Texas, and if it was hard to hear, he said, I live in Texas. I've gone down to the border a couple of times, and I can tell you that the border is a terrible mess. So he's like using his authority as a Texan, which he's been for 20 years, to then have a claim about his position on the border. I don't think this hurts Walker that much, except maybe a few people who might have otherwise like come out to vote are like, you know what, skip this. This is so absurd. I'm not even going to bother doing this. But like, if this is the thing that gets you off the Walker train, like.
Well, you know, he's like, he is to Georgia what Marion Barry was to D.C. He's a Georgian for life.
Yes. Well, he also is a Georgian for life. You know, he's born in northern Georgia. Yeah. He was a high school football star. And he was then a star at Georgia. So, like, those things, I think, in some ways make you a Georgian for life. Like, Dr. Oz doesn't know anything about Pennsylvania.
We were when we were talking about this segment earlier this week, we were thinking it was an interesting contrast with what happened in Pennsylvania, because it was absolutely hugely damaging to the Oz campaign that he was not a Pennsylvanian, that he lived in New Jersey. Everyone sort of knew that. He didn't have any of the like real hallmarks of Pennsylvania residency. Didn't seem to be all that familiar with the state. He got the melody wrong, as Ryan reminded me, on Fly Eagles Fly during the debate. He just was out of place, and it felt exploitive and opportunistic. And what was funny is that Dr. Oz tried to, like, he sprinted away from that, right? Like, he didn't want to talk about it at all, instead of just kind of owning it and being like, yeah, well, you know, I'm a super millionaire. I don't live here. Herschel Walker.
He spelled his alleged town wrong. Dr. Oz did.
Right.
It was his in-laws' house or something.
Herschel Walker is just like, hey, I've lived in Texas for a long time. He's claiming he's getting the tax exemption.
The best case you could make for him would be, I was in my Texas home, and so that's a rich person who has like 8 different homes, and you gotta, but then when you take the homestead or primary home exemption, you kind of undermine yourself there.
I want to put C4 up on the screen. Ryan, this is something you flagged and you've been looking at over the course of the last week and have found some, I think, interesting data from it. This is early voting in the Republican and Democratic side in Georgia general elections and runoffs over the last 4 years. What stood out to you here?
Yeah, so if you want to follow along at home, this is targetearly.targetsmart.com. This is a Democratic data firm. So they pull together lots of kind of consumer data. They pile it on top of voter registration data and voter information. And they were the ones that really nailed the midterms. They were getting made fun of as mongers of hopium and copium all throughout the election because they were saying, look, what we're seeing does not comport with a red wave. So what they're seeing right now, so far in the runoff, and this is updated as of just now, it's 1,145,000 votes, which is a ton. So because if you look
crazy.
If you look at the runoff from 2021, that was a total of about 4.5 million votes. So in other words, in only a few days, a quarter of the number of people who voted in the Warnock and Ossoff runoff elections 2 years ago have already voted in this one. Now it's truncated. They had an extra month. So now you're going to have a ton of turnout, pushed onto election day. Now, a key thing to remember is that young people tend to vote very late. And so that's why Democrats actually ended up
as do Republicans.
As it went along.
That's the other thing.
Yes.
Republicans tend to vote late too.
So both of those. So that the young people and the Republicans voting late balances it out. The remaining votes should lean Republican, but because young people also vote late, that hurts Democrats.
And here's an interesting thing to keep in mind Tuesday night. The next time we see you here, the election will have been over. But actually, no, that's not true. We're filling in next week.
Right.
But the interesting thing to watch for is that young people will vote possibly by mail on the last day. So that's where,
they might do that
as
too.
you're looking for returns, Republicans may vote in person last day in higher numbers, whereas young people may vote by mail in higher numbers, and that will affect the numbers as they're coming in.
So according to the numbers that are up so far that TargetSmart has here, so it's 54-38, right? It's breaking down. So they don't know who they voted for, but 54.1% have been Democrats, and 37.8% have been Republicans, which is about a 16-point lead.
It's a
so
huge
lead. Republicans, like I said, as you know, on election day, that's a more Republican turnout because they think voting by mail is fraudulent and all the ballots are going to wind up in Venezuela. And so, but to overcome, with only 3/4 of the vote left, to overcome a 16-point gap is going to be tough with a lot of the youth vote still out because they've also been able to model that the youth vote that's in so far is significantly lower than the youth vote that voted overall in Georgia. Right. So that means a lot of them are holding on to their ballots.
Yeah, and keeping the momentum for a runoff is obviously always a very difficult thing to do. But Republicans are, so a good example is Nevada. On election night, you were saying, you had sources in Nevada saying, Laxalt takes this if there's no snow.
Right.
And then there's snow on election day, and Republicans, according to that theory, turn out in lower numbers because of the snow on election day. And so a lot of people on the right have spent, basically the last month saying, early voting is not going anywhere. Adapt or die.
Yeah, do it. Last point on this, then we move on. For Democrats, they're a pretty united party at this point. Like the center, the center right, center left, the far left, they all like Warnock. Like the Republicans in Georgia, not so much. So where does not having Kemp on the ballot? What is not having Kemp on the ballot, or Raffensperger, or these other Republican kind of establishment figures that the suburban Republicans liked, and then let's say they come out, they voted for them, and then they're like, well, I like Walker better than Warnock, so they cast their vote for Walker. But without them being on the ballot this time, do you think there's going to be less Republican turnout as a result from the people who are like, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because comparing the enthusiasm and momentum for one candidate in a general as opposed to another candidate in the general, and then comparing it to one candidate in a runoff, it's just hard because it's probably going to be a different sample, basically, of people who are coming out. I mean, certainly it's going to be a different sample of people who are coming out. The question, though, is whether Walker voters, there are enough like enthusiastic Walker voters. That's one thing that I would be looking at. To kind of remember Alabama with the Roy Moore vote. There were a lot of people, and he obviously ultimately lost to Doug Jones, but there were a lot of people who, were coming out, might be Richard Shelby voters, Katie Britt type voters, but were coming out and saying, we're coming out, we don't want to do this, but because of abortion, because of that specific issue, we're coming out to vote for Roy Moore. And obviously Herschel Walker and Roy Moore are very different characters, but I think it's kind of similar in the respect that you have the high profile, high stakes type of one-on-one dynamic, and maybe that's enough to energize single issue Republicans to go support Walker in high numbers.
And we'll see.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.